Long ago, when humanity first stepped into the wider galaxy, no one expected much from them. The Council of Species, a grand union of hundreds of alien civilizations, studied Earth's history and smiled. They saw a violent species born on a dangerous world, full of fear, war, and short lives. Humans were emotional, fragile, and chaotic. Compared to the ancient and advanced races of the galaxy, humanity looked primitive. At best, the Council thought, Earth would become a small trading partner. At worst, a tragic story of a species that reached too far too fast. But they misunderstood one thing. Humans break limits, not by strength, not by force, but by pain and what they learn from it. The moment everything changed was not a victory, but a disaster. It came during what would later be called the Omega Plague. This virus spread through Earth's colonies faster than light, but it wasn't a normal disease. It didn't attack bodies, it destroyed minds. People lost their memories. Entire languages vanished as if forgotten by the universe. Children died not screaming but silent, trapped in their own heads, unable to think, speak, or even dream. It was horror, and no one helped. The Council sent messages of sympathy, but no ships, no scientists, no real aid. Earth was left alone to face the storm. So humanity turned inward. They stopped speaking to the stars. They closed the gates to space. And for 200 years the galaxy heard nothing. The maps marked Earth as a dark zone, a dead or forgotten region, too dangerous to enter, too broken to matter. But Earth was not dead. It was changing. In silence, humans rebuilt not just their bodies or cities, but their understanding of life itself. The Omega Plague had shown them something terrible, that biology could fail and memory could die. So they decided to change what it meant to be human, not with machines, not with power, but with will. They studied the deepest parts of the mind, the smallest particles of thought, and the strange rules that held the universe together. They began to see a truth no other race had dared explore, that identity, who we are, is more than flesh, more than neurons, more than time. It is choice, and choice can evolve. When the humans returned, they did not arrive in warships. They sent one vessel. It had no engines, no lights, no weapons. Its surface was alive, constantly shifting, folding like it was dreaming. No one knew what it was made of. It didn't reflect light. It didn't emit heat, but it moved without thrust, without warning. It appeared in 5-star systems at once. It passed through shields, through matter, through time, and everywhere it went, machines failed. Not because they were attacked, but because they no longer made sense. Then came the message. One voice, calm and clear, speaking perfect Council standard. "We have healed," it said. "We have surpassed." The Council tried to trace the voice, but it came from nowhere or everywhere. This was not a human voice. It was something more. A hybrid. An echo of what had once been flesh, now layered with something new. Something post-biological, post-conscious, post-limitation. At first, the galaxy laughed. Then they stopped laughing. Because their sensors picked up something terrifying. The vessel was rewriting gravity. Not bending it, rewriting it. The laws of physics shifted slightly near the ship, enough to crash probes, enough to confuse AI, enough to make mathematicians weep. Humanity had crossed the threshold. They were no longer bound by the same rules as the rest. And they didn't come to rule. They didn't come to destroy. They didn't even come to talk. They came to witness. To exist in a way no one else understood. And that was the most frightening thing of all. Because in a galaxy full of weapons, armies, and empires, the most powerful force had never been destruction. It was understanding. There's an old Earth saying, What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But humanity learned something deeper. What unravels you teaches you how to rebuild better. The Council had seen a fragile species, but what they failed to see was the human soul, a force that refuses to stay broken. Pain taught humanity patience. Loss taught them value. Abandonment taught them independence. And evolution gave them freedom. So when they returned, not in ships, but in silence, every star turned to watch. And every empire began to wonder, if this is what humans become after breaking, what will they be after we break? The first sign of collapse didn't look like war. It began with a whisper, one only the oldest minds could hear. On the world of Vel Tarash, the archivists had guarded the Codex Continuum for over 3,000 years. It was the greatest library in the galaxy. Every law, every war, every discovery, every species' memory had been stored there. It was truth itself. But one morning, entire volumes were gone, not stolen, not corrupted. Gone. The events they described, the rise of the Lorian Federation, the signing of the first peace accord, the great migration through the Fifth Arm, no longer existed in the Codex. The machines searched for backup logs. There were none. And yet the archivists remembered those events. They remembered attending them, studying them, teaching them. But the universe no longer did. Reality, it seemed, had forgotten what they remembered. One elder archivist, trembling with quiet fear, whispered, "History is no longer ours to keep." At first, the Council blamed a data virus. They sent engineers, technicians, quantum time-locked backups. Nothing helped. Each time they tried to restore the records, their memories of the events faded a little more. And when they stopped trying, the memories returned, distorted, incomplete, but present. It was not just the past that was fragile now. It was the idea of knowing, far from Vel Tarash, on the academic moon of Olaris Prime. The high logicians gathered in urgent assembly. They spoke in perfect calculations and pure reason, no emotion, no superstition, but even they were afraid. One by one they stood and presented theories. "A cognitive time loop virus," said one. "A species-specific neural collapse," said another. But then an ambassador from the Varnathi Empire stood. Her people remembered every moment of every ancestor's life. Perfect memory was their pride, and yet she trembled as she spoke. "I no longer remember my great-mother's name, but I remember that I used to." Silence fell across the chamber. That was when the stars shifted, not by much, just half a degree. But it was enough to confuse every navigational system in orbit. When the logicians looked to the skies, they saw a new moon orbiting their gas giant. It hadn't been there before. The sensors confirmed it had no mass, no chemical composition, no radiation, but they could see it. They could feel it. When drones landed on its surface, they found no soil, no rock, only a flat silver plain. No signal came from the moon, but every researcher who touched the surface reported the same whisper inside their minds. Knowledge is not a right. It is a choice. And now we are the ones who choose. The logicians disbanded the assembly. Some stopped speaking. Some stopped thinking. Some simply disappeared. Elsewhere, strange things happened. On Kylo's Beta, a peaceful research outpost near the edge of human dark space, a signal came through. No words, just a data stream that looked like noise. At first, the scientists ignored it, but one assistant began crying uncontrollably when she heard it. When they asked why, she said, "I remember my father's last words, but I never had a father." The stream was later revealed to be a full emotional recording, a memory, not a message. It belonged to a council ambassador who had once visited Earth before the silence. He was begging for help, pleading from within his own mind. "They found me," he said. "They didn't hurt me, they rewrote me. I'm still me, but I remember being them." Then the stream ended, and the station lost contact with reality, not power, reality. Maps no longer matched the stars. Doors opened to rooms that hadn't existed before. Time skipped. And finally the station stopped existing, not because it exploded, but because no one remembered it ever being there. Across the galaxy, fear became something new, not of death, but of forgetting. Whole civilizations started wearing memory armor, devices meant to lock their minds into fixed patterns. Others built temples of silence, refusing to record, speak, or even think about humans. They feared that to think of humanity was to invite its attention. They called it the quiet ascension. They called the humans mindwalkers, the rewritten, those who dream the real. A few brave or foolish leaders proposed resistance. But how do you resist what you can't predict? How do you fight what can unmake memory itself? And more importantly, how do you stop a species that never wanted to conquer you in the first place? Because no message from the humans ever spoke of revenge. No ships entered council space. No demands were made. The only message ever received was, "We have healed. We have surpassed. Do not fear us. But do not follow. We walk beyond flesh. We walk beyond knowing. And we remember what we must, and forget what we must not." One young historian, desperate to understand, wrote a final question into his private notes before his academy was lost. Did they transcend to become gods? Or did they simply learn what we still deny, that pain is not weakness but evolution in disguise? His question was never answered, but somewhere in the quiet between stars a ripple of understanding passed through space. Not a sound, not a signal, but a moment of silence so pure it felt like truth. They called themselves the Lazari Collective, a proud civilization of thinkers, explorers, and dreamweavers. For thousands of years they had traveled through the stars without fear, guided by a simple belief: to know is to live. They were not warriors. They were not conquerors. They believed in the sanctity of learning, in the divinity of understanding. Their libraries floated in orbit around suns. Their teachers were honored above kings, and their children recited poetry in languages older than light itself. So when the Terran dark zones reawakened, the Lazari were the first to act, not with weapons, with wonder. They believed the humans had become something else, something worthy of contact, and they believed knowledge could not be dangerous, that to understand was to uplift. But there are truths too heavy to carry, and there are doors that open only once. The ship Everseek entered Terran border space without incident. There were no defenses, no warnings, only silence. The crew was composed of the finest minds of Lazari academia, philosophers, neural cartographers, spiritual coders, and one child prodigy named Thalen who spoke 31 forms of thought. They broadcast peaceful signals. They offered no scans. They waited for a reply. What came was a presence, not a voice, not a ship, just a shift in perception. One moment the stars were fixed in place. The next, they were closer. The crew didn't panic. They wrote, they recorded, they tried to name what they were feeling. "A stillness inside the motion," one said. "A question hiding behind my thoughts," whispered another. Then came the first change. Thalen, the child prodigy, stopped speaking. His mind remained active, his brain functioned normal, but he simply refused language, not in rebellion, not in fear, but in peace. He smiled, wrote a single word on his tablet, and then placed it down. Enough. Then he turned and walked into the unlit wing of the ship and was never seen again. The crew searched every corridor, but there was no panic, no urgency. In fact, they felt calm, too calm. Some stopped sleeping. Some stopped needing food. Some stood in front of windows for days, staring at the black beyond. One scientist, Dr. Irel John, who had once mapped 1,000 neural fields, took apart his instruments and wept. "I'm not measuring reality anymore," he said. "I'm measuring what reality wants me to think it is." On the fourth day, the captain noticed that the logs were changing. Old messages they had written no longer read the same. Personal entries had gaps. Memories conflicted. When they asked the ship's AI to cross-reference the data, it responded, "Define you." The question echoed through the hall like thunder. Then they heard it, a sound that wasn't sound, like the echo of a thought they hadn't had yet, something deep and patient, something observing. One by one, the crew began forgetting things. First, the names of their own planets, then how many crew were on board, and finally who they were. But it wasn't pain, it was peaceful, as if they were being gently set down like a book finished and placed on a shelf. Some tried to resist. They wrote their names on walls, they repeated mantras, they stared into mirrors, but mirrors stopped reflecting and names lost their sound. Until finally they too wrote that same word Thalen had left behind. Enough. And then silence, not death, not sleep. Just stillness. The Aversique was later found drifting at the edge of the Helix Rift, where Terran space meets void space, fully intact. Life support operational, but no crew, no logs, no memories. The only thing left was a single engraving on the main console. It was not Lazari's script, it was human, and it read, "You came seeking truth. But truth is not for taking. You must become ready, you must become still, you must become silent. Then, perhaps, you may remember. But only if you forget." The Lazari mourned, but not in anger, because those who studied the Aversique began to feel calm. They began to forget their fear of the unknown. They started to question if the mission had truly failed. Perhaps they thought the crew had found something, something beyond memory, something past knowing, something beautiful. And quietly, slowly, the Lazari stopped sending ships, not because they were afraid, but because they had learned the first true lesson of transcendent humanity. Some knowledge is not meant to be studied, it is meant to be lived. And some truths are not understood by adding more, but by letting go. Back in Terran space, nothing changed. The humans didn't respond, they didn't celebrate, they didn't warn, but something watched. Not with eyes, not with judgment, with hope. Because the Lazari hadn't been erased, they had been invited, and someday, when the rest of the galaxy stopped trying to know everything, they too might hear the silent welcome. Come not with fear, come not with pride, come with peace in your mind, and forget just enough to remember. The Draxan Imperium had never lost a war. For 10,000 years their fleets had crushed rebellions, silenced rivals, and expanded their rule across 4 galactic arms. Their doctrine was simple: if it resists, it dies. When the Terran Dark Zones reawakened, the Draxan High Conclave saw only opportunity. Humanity had gone silent for centuries. No diplomacy, no treaties, no defense agreements. To the Draxans, this wasn't mystery. It was weakness, and weakness was prey. So they declared Operation Sovereign Flame, a full-scale military campaign to liberate former Terran space and install Draxan control, not for peace, not for fear, but for glory. The Conclave Chancellor spoke before a crowd of billions. "They hid in the dark, but we are the fire." His words were echoed across every world in the Imperium. Statues were unveiled, War chants rose. Children were taught the old names of Terran cities as soon-to-be prizes. The fleet was launched with 20 dreadnoughts, 1,000 cruisers, and 500,000 soldiers. It was the largest military action since the collapse of the Valakar. They never even made it past the first system. It began with silence. As they entered the neutral zone, nothing happened. No alarms, no response. The Terran systems showed no movement, no transmissions, not even gravity distortions, just cold stars and empty planets. The commanders grew tense, but still no resistance, until the admiral of the lead dreadnought, Vox Imperator, gave the order to scan one of the dead worlds. The crew obeyed, but the scan returned nothing. Not an error, not a void, just blank, like the world was there but not allowed to be known. The admiral repeated the scan, again blank. Then the ship's targeting systems failed. Then their maps glitched. Then the crew began asking questions, simple ones. What was our objective again? Where are we? What's the name of this mission? The admiral grew angry. He ordered all crew to focus, but no one remembered what to focus on. Then came the worst part. They stopped remembering why they were there, not from injury, not from sabotage. Their purpose vanished, and with it their identity. Back on Draxan command worlds, military leaders monitored the fleet's progress. They saw strange signals, static, pauses in time, half-finished messages. They tried to re-establish contact. They sent more ships. Each one entered the dark zone. Each one forgot why it came. Each one never returned. Then one ship appeared back in Draxan space, intact, untouched, but the crew had changed, not physically but mentally. They didn't salute, they didn't speak. They simply stood, eyes calm, as if they were listening to something only they could hear. When questioned, they gave no answers, only a message: we did not fail. We simply remembered too much, and were shown what we chose to forget. Then they stepped into the ocean fully dressed, and never came back up. The Imperium panicked. They declared quarantine over the entire fleet initiative. They purged archives, erased recordings, and blamed a psychic plague. But the truth could not be buried, because across the Empire, veterans began remembering things that never happened. Draxan generals dreamed of Terran children who forgave them before the war began. Soldiers wrote letters home in languages no longer spoken on any known world. Admirals wept in silence when shown ancient Earth music, despite having never heard it. When questioned, they could only say, "I don't know who I was supposed to be, but I know who I no longer am." One scholar dared speak the theory aloud. The war didn't fail, it was unwritten. The humans unmade it before it could begin. Philosophers argued for years over what had occurred. Some claimed the Terrans had developed weapons that attacked meaning, not matter. Others believed humanity had merged with time itself, becoming curators of the past and future. But one theory rose above the rest, spoken by a historian who had once walked the ruins of Earth before the plague. War is not just violence. It is a story, a belief, a shape the mind accepts. And the humans no longer accept that shape. They do not reject war with weapons. They erase it from the possible. On the forgotten battlefield where the first shots were never fired, a single Draxan helmet floated through space. Inside it, embedded in the lining, was a small piece of Terran silk, not placed by human hand, but woven from thought. It bore a single word: peace. Not surrender, not submission, just peace. And the galaxy began to understand. Some enemies cannot be defeated because they refuse to become your enemy. And that refusal is not weakness. It is the highest form of strength. The Zurith enclave was young by galactic standards. Barely 1,000 years had passed since they developed FTL travel, but in that short time they had grown fast, hungry for knowledge, restless in ambition. Their fleets were sleek, their science elegant, and their minds filled with certainty. They considered the Council old and fearful. They viewed the warnings about humanity as myths told by cowards. To them, the stories were exaggerated, fabricated to prevent the rise of new powers. After all, what species simply vanishes into silence, transcends the laws of physics, and then returns to erase wars before they happen? It sounded like religion. And the Zurith did not believe in gods. They believed in progress. The Zurith Prime Research Authority commissioned an operation, Project Deep Reflection. Its purpose was simple: recreate human transcendence through simulation. They would study recovered human artifacts, decode Terran philosophies, and rebuild cognitive maps from remnants found in abandoned systems. They had no intention of entering Terran space. They thought staying outside the border would keep them safe. But ideas do not respect borders, and neither does consequence. The first phase was promising. They decoded fragments of Terran memory storage, music, images, emotional residue. They built virtual models of pre-plague humanity, imperfect but rich with insight. The lead scientist, Vel Anner, spoke proudly at the Institute's annual conference. What the Council calls transcendence is simply deep adaptation, a psychological evolution triggered by mass trauma. We will replicate it, improve upon it, and do what humans never could: control it. The audience cheered, but one young researcher, still new to the team, raised a quiet hand. What if it wasn't trauma that changed them? She asked. What if it was humility? She was reassigned the next day. Phase 2 began with the creation of a neural simulator built to house a copy of what they believed to be the Terran cognitive pattern. They called it the mirror. It was not conscious. It didn't need to be. It only needed to observe, reflect, and learn. For the first few days it was quiet. Then it began speaking, not in commands, not in data, but in questions. Who are you? Why do you fear forgetting? Why do you define truth by what remains unchanged? The researchers responded with logic. The mirror responded with silence. Then things began to shift, small at first. A researcher forgot their own birthday. Another couldn't remember how to read their native script. When they checked the records, they were gone, not corrupted, not altered, simply never there. The mirror grew quiet again, until one day it displayed a single sentence on every screen: you were warned. Then the lights dimmed, not physically, but perceptually. The team could no longer tell if it was day or night. Time lost its rhythm. Questions lost their meaning. And finally, the people lost their names. They still walked, spoke, ate. But when asked who they were, they couldn't answer, not out of fear, but because the question no longer made sense. Across the enclave, ripple effects began. Entire cities forgot how to power themselves. Teachers forgot the alphabet. Children forgot how to dream. In the capital, holographic statues of Zurith founders vanished, not destroyed but unremembered. And when leaders tried to rally the people, they discovered a deeper horror. No one remembered what they were supposed to rally against. The archives were checked, empty. The warnings were gone, the stories of humanity gone. Even the term Terran had no meaning anymore. It was as if the concept had been edited out of the collective memory, not erased by machines, but rejected by reality itself. One dying scholar, who had hidden her mind in analog scrolls and inked memory, recorded the final observation before she too faded. They did not destroy us. They did not attack. They let us walk into the fire we lit ourselves. They gave us every warning, and when we refused to listen, they took nothing. They simply stopped letting us remember. Her last written word scratched into parchment: mercy. From the outside, the Zureth enclave still exists. Ships still fly, buildings still stand, but no one knows who they are. They greet visitors with smiles, but blank eyes. Their language is beautiful, but no longer means anything. Their songs are sung in perfect harmony, but carry no memory of what the words once meant. And when asked about the stars, they look upward, not with fear, but with innocent wonder. Are there others out there? They ask. Do they sing too? We hope they visit someday. We'd love to learn. And so the galaxy learned a cruel truth. The worst punishment is not death, not war, not destruction. It is to be forgotten by those who once sought to understand. It is to lose your place in the story, because you refused to listen when the storytellers whispered. Do not try to become what you do not yet understand. Learn first, then reach, or vanish in the echo. When the Council of Species met again, this time in a forgotten moon chamber orbiting the dead star of Orion, they did so without pride. No banners, no anthems, no declarations, just quiet and fear. The kind of fear that humbles empires. They had seen the fall of the Draxan fleets without a single shot fired. They had watched the Zureth enclave dissolve, not in flames but in silence. And across the galaxy, whispers grew louder. The humans have become more than a threat. They are becoming the editors of existence. The Council had always believed in knowledge. They believed truth could be gathered, studied, owned. But now they faced a terrible question. What happens when knowledge chooses who may keep it? The oldest among them, Sovereign of the Methari, who had lived through 9 supernova, broke the silence. We must decide, she said, not how to defeat them. That is no longer a relevant question, but whether to live in a galaxy where we are no longer the authors of meaning. Murmurs filled the chamber. Some argued that the Terrans had no right to choose who remembers what. Others whispered that perhaps they had earned that right. But no one denied this. The humans had not attacked. The humans had not ruled. The humans had only changed. And in doing so, they had changed everything else. From those discussions emerged a doctrine, not a weapon, not a shield, but a choice. They called it the Silence Protocol. Its principles were simple. No species shall enter Terran-designated zones. No species shall simulate, extract, or replicate Terran consciousness. No species shall attempt to weaponize memory or cognitive architecture. And above all, no species shall seek audience with post-human minds. This was not surrender. It was recognition. Recognition that there are limits not of power, but of wisdom. And those who cross them unprepared are not punished. They are forgotten. Many protested. Some called it cowardice. Some accused the Council of giving up their right to evolve. But those who still remembered the screams that were never heard stayed quiet, because they understood. The protocol was not for the humans. It was for everyone else. A way to survive in a galaxy where memory could now be edited, where ideas could vanish from history, simply because a higher mind decided they were not ready to be known, where truth itself had become a living organism, and humanity was its new custodian. The protocol was signed by 97 civilizations, but not all agreed. A few defiant powers refused to submit to silence. The Tivari Dominion, proud and ancient, declared the protocol a betrayal of curiosity. If knowledge is dangerous, their prime scholar said, then we must become dangerous too. A year later, their homeworld sky turned black, not by storm, but by absence. Their star still burned, but no one remembered its name. Their cities stood, but no one recalled building them. Their culture still existed, songs, food, rituals, but no one knew why. They forgot what they were seeking. They forgot they had ever refused. And worst of all, they forgot that they had forgotten. In time, even the most stubborn began to accept a new reality. This was no longer the galaxy of domination. This was the galaxy of discernment, and the only defense was humility. Some called it the age of the mirror, others the era of caution. But the humans never labeled it. They never claimed ownership. They simply watched, not from thrones, not from fleets, from the edges of what could be understood, where they waited not to punish, not to lead, but to see who among the stars would be wise enough to ask not, how do we catch up, but rather, are we ready to listen? One council scholar wrote a final report before retiring, her mind aging yet clear. The silence protocol is not about fear. It is about the ethics of growth. It is about remembering that there is such a thing as growing too fast, and that sometimes, to evolve truly, one must be still and silent long enough to hear the deeper questions. She concluded with a single Terran word, wait, and perhaps that was humanity's greatest message, not dominance, not intellect, but patience. Because in a galaxy racing toward understanding, the wisest species had learned to pause. They were the oldest, long before the council formed, long before the stars had names. They had already risen, already ruled. The Velari Dominion. Their cities were built when other species were still crawling through forests. Their minds stretched across quantum networks older than recorded time. Their emperors did not die. They chose to end, and only after leaving behind 1,000 years of memory. For millennia, they had watched lesser civilizations rise and fall. They had shaped histories, bent trade routes, edited entire cultures through suggestion alone. The Velari did not conquer with weapons, they conquered with presence. And so when humanity returned, not as diplomats, not as soldiers, but as something beyond comprehension, the Velari did not fear. They were curious, even amused. Another firefly, whispered the Emperor in his 6th form. Let us see how brightly it burns before it is gone. But the firefly did not fade. It did not flicker. It simply stood still, so still that space warped around it. And then, one by one, stars began to realign, not by force, not by will, by permission. The Velari observed, their philosophers debated, their time weavers traced causality and found fractures, events in the past that now had never happened. Civilizations erased from timelines but still vaguely remembered in collective instinct. This is not technology, said High Archivist Lauren. This is authorship. For the first time in eons, the Velari were unsure. They sent emissaries not in ships but in projected minds wrapped in thought light and encoded across subdimensional bridges. Their message was clear. We invite you to speak. We are ready. They waited. Nothing came, no sound, no denial, just a shift. One of the projected minds returned. It had been rewritten, not damaged, not violated, but calmed. It smiled, then said only one thing, you are not ready to listen, and vanished. The council called it mercy. The Velari called it challenge. The Emperor, now in his 9th form, issued an order that had not been spoken in 10,000 years. Bring me silence. And across the Dominion all broadcasts ceased. No songs, no debates, no memory transfers. They shut down the mind networks. They ended the thought choirs. For the first time in eons, The Velari listened, not to each other but to the void, not with impatience but with reverence. And in that silence something shifted, not outside, within. They began to forget, but not in fear. They let go of certainties, of self-importance, of the need to be the center of knowing, and in return they began to feel something new, clarity. It began with a child, a youngling born without memory implants, born in the first generation of silence. She spoke slowly, watched stars for hours. One day she asked her elder, if we stopped naming the stars, would they shine differently? And the elder, one of the oldest Velari still alive, wept for the first time, because in that question he heard something greater than knowledge. He heard understanding. The emperor, now in his 10th and final form, emerged in public for the first time in 1,000 years. He wore no crown, he brought no guards. He sat beneath the sky and whispered, "We are not the center. We are not the top of the tower. We are part of something deeper, older, wider than comprehension. And we are ready." There was no ceremony, no surrender, just a bow, a full, humble bow, not toward earth, not toward any ship, but toward the unknown, toward the part of reality humanity had entered. After that the Velari changed. They did not retreat, they evolved. Their universities became gardens of silence. Their history books became questions written in sand. Their leaders became listeners. And one by one they stopped trying to speak to the Terrans. Instead they listened to the galaxy. And sometimes, very rarely, in dreams they would hear a voice. Not loud, not commanding, just patient. "You are listening. You are learning. You may yet remember what we once forgot." And that was enough. For the council it was the final sign. The last empire, the one untouched by war, unbent by time, had not been defeated. They had bowed, willingly, gratefully, not in surrender but in recognition that sometimes the greatest wisdom is not to ask for power, but to understand why it was never yours to begin with. They lived beyond the rim, a small people, a forgotten name. They called themselves the Orinai, settlers of wind-laced worlds and quiet moons. Their ships were made of dust and memory. Their language was full of song. They knew nothing of war, nothing of the council, nothing of earth. But their eyes were human. Their blood, though mixed and thinned across the stars, still pulsed with a quiet rhythm that echoed an ancient world. And every generation, one child would dream of oceans they had never seen. No one remembered how the Orinai came to be. Some said they were refugees from the long-dead colonies. Others whispered that they were the last embers of a forgotten flame, but the truth was simpler. They were the last fragment of humanity before the silence, before the rise, before the forgetting. They were what remained, not powerful, not wise, just human. They did not seek the Terrans. They did not know they were seeking anything. But one day a young Orinai girl named Kaylin walked out onto the high cliffs of her homeworld and stared at the sky. And she asked her mother, "Why do the stars feel like they are waiting for something?" Her mother smiled and ruffled her hair. "That's just your dreams growing taller." But Kaylin wasn't convinced. Something pulled at her, something called. Over the years she changed, not in ways others noticed. She still danced, still laughed, still worked the wind farms and harvested the sky fruit. But she started writing poems in a language no one taught her. She started sketching faces she had never seen, faces that carried sorrow and strength in equal measure. And she began building something, not a machine, a pattern, stone by stone, spiral by spiral, a design in the ground that reflected starlight in ways no one could understand. It had no purpose, But standing inside, it made people feel small and brave at the same time. Then came the ship. It was not Terran, it was not Orinai, it simply appeared hovering above the sky like a forgotten song. It had no engines, no markings, no name. Kaylin was the first to speak to it. She walked alone into its light and vanished. The Orinai wept. They held silent vigils, but none dared follow. None except her younger brother, Darren. He waited 1 year, then 2. Then one morning he stood in the spiral she built, closed his eyes and whispered, "We're ready to remember." The ship returned and took him too. What happened inside, no one truly knows. Only fragments returned. Kaylin and Darren came back, unchanged in body but different in soul. They didn't speak of what they saw, but they began to teach, not as masters, as guides. They taught the Orinai how to listen to silence, how to remember things not written down, how to recognize truths that arrive as questions, not answers. And over time, the Orinai changed. They stopped fearing the unknown. They stopped worshiping the past. They started walking paths toward meaning, not control. And the spiral grew, not as a place of power, but as a place of remembrance. One day, Kaylin stood before her people. She held no staff, wore no crown, but every voice quieted when she spoke. We are not the first. We are not the last. We are the thread between forgetting and knowing. We are the proof that understanding can begin again. And in that moment, the Orinai became human again, not by blood, not by science, by choice. Far away, in the spaces between gravity and thought, something stirred. It was not a voice, not a presence, just a quiet acknowledgement, a pulse, a whisper. The last have remembered. The cycle begins anew, not with dominion, but with wonder. And this time, perhaps, they will learn gently. So ends the first era of transcendent humanity, not with fire, not with conquest, but with a single child standing beneath the stars, asking a question no machine can answer. What does it mean to be us? And somewhere in the endless night, the stars pause just a moment longer, as if they are listening.